For 4 minutes, I was legally dead. My heart had stopped its rhythm. My lungs had frozen mid-breath, and the doctors in that sterile hospital room had already stopped speaking in hopeful tones. They weren't trying to save me anymore in the way you see in movies with heroic music and shouting. They were going through the mechanical, desperate motions of a failed rescue. To the world of science and the cold ink of a medical report, I was a flatline on a monitor, an 81-year-old body that had finally reached its expiration date. But while they were giving up on my flesh, I was experiencing something so vivid, so terrifyingly beautiful, and so impossibly real that it makes everything I've seen in my 8 decades on Earth look like a flickering, black and white shadow. I know there are skeptics watching this. I know there are people who will say it was just the brain firing off its last chemical signals, a final trick of the neurons as the oxygen faded. I understand that. I used to be a man who trusted only what I could hold in my calloused hands. At 81, you learn to be a realist. But I am not here to preach a doctrine. I'm not here to sell you a religion. And I'm certainly not here to tell you what you must believe. I can only tell you what I experienced when the lights went out. If you have ever sat by the bed of a dying loved one, or if you wake up in the middle of the night terrified of your own inevitable end, you need to hear this. Because those 4 minutes didn't just show me what lies beyond the curtain. They showed me why we are here in the first place and why every single second of our struggle matters. It started on a Tuesday that felt like any other. At my age, routine is the only thing that keeps you grounded. I had my coffee, I watched the birds at the feeder, and I went to the hospital for what was supposed to be a simple, routine procedure to help my circulation. But at 81, routine is a dangerous word. I remember the biting coldness of the surgical table and the clinical, detached way the nurses prepped the equipment, their voices a low hum of office gossip and weekend plans. Then, without warning, a sudden, crushing weight hit my chest. It felt like an invisible giant hand had reached inside my ribcage and simply squeezed the life out of my heart like a dry sponge. I saw the lead surgeon's eyes widen above his mask. I heard the alarm on the monitor, a long, continuous, high-pitched beep that seemed to echo into a vast, empty canyon. And then the room didn't just go dark. It dissolved. But here is where it gets strange and where my skepticism died forever. I didn't fall into a void of nothingness. Instead, I felt a sudden, violent pull, like being sucked out of a straw or launched from a catapult. 1 second, I was gasping for a breath that wouldn't come. And the next, I was standing in a silence so profound it felt heavy, like the air after a massive snowfall. I looked down, and for a heart-stopping moment I saw them. I saw the top of the surgeon's balding head. I saw the nurse's panicked, gloved hands pumping on my chest. I saw an 81-year-old man, pale and frail, who looked like a discarded suit of clothes I had finished wearing for the day. I felt a surge of raw panic. Was this it? Was I just going to be an invisible observer, trapped in a hospital ceiling, watching my own family grieve? I tried to scream, to tell them I was still right there, that I felt younger than I had in decades, but I had no voice. I felt a moment of intense micro-tension, a terrifying thought that maybe this was what eternity was, being a ghost in a room that no longer had a place for you. I watched them shock my body, saw my chest jump, and felt nothing. No pain. Just a strange, distant pity for that old man on the table. Will I be stuck here forever? I wondered. Is this the end of the line? A silent spectator to a world I can no longer touch? Then, the hospital walls began to vibrate. They didn't disappear. They became transparent, like smoke, and then they faded into a darkness that wasn't dark. It was a living, breathing shadow, a place between places. I felt a presence behind me, something vast and ancient. I was terrified to turn around. My mind, conditioned by years of human fear, thought, is this the judgment? Is this where every lie I told, every person I hurt, and every mistake I made in 81 years will be weighed against me? I stood there in that between space, feeling the weight of my life. I thought of the times I was dishonest in my younger years. I thought of the arguments I had with my father. I felt the tension of a life being summarized. But as I finally turned, the fear didn't just leave me. It evaporated as if it had never existed. There was no judge. There was no angry deity with a clipboard. There was only a light. It wasn't a tunnel with a light at the end. It was as if the light was a doorway and the doorway was an invitation. As I moved toward it, not by walking, but by simply intending to be closer, the colors became so intense they felt like they had a pulse. I saw hues of violet and gold that don't exist in our spectrum. I saw what looked like a vast, rolling landscape, a garden that seemed to go on forever, where every leaf and every blade of grass seemed to be singing its own unique note in a grand, cosmic symphony. But even in this paradise, there was tension. I felt a boundary. There was an invisible line in the grass, a shift in the vibration of the air. I knew with a bone-deep certainty that I cannot explain that if I crossed that line, the silver cord would snap. There would be no coming back. My children, my grandchildren, the life I still had left to breathe, it would all be sealed. I stood on the edge of that forever, torn between the most incredible peace I had ever felt and the tether of my love for those I left behind. What if I move 1 inch too far? I thought. What if the choice is taken from me? And then she appeared. Martha, my wife, who had been gone for 15 long, lonely winters. She didn't look like the woman I buried. She didn't look like the tired, pained soul she was in those final days. She looked exactly as she did when we were first starting our lives together, yet she carried the wisdom of 1,000 lifetimes in her eyes. She was radiant, glowing from within. I ran toward her, my soul crying out her name, but as I reached out to touch her, she stepped back, just enough to keep the distance. "Not yet, Bill," she said. Her voice didn't come from a throat or through the air. It vibrated inside my own essence, clear as a bell and warm as a summer afternoon. "Why?" I pleaded. I felt a desperate, agonizing tension. "Let me stay. It's too heavy back there, Martha. My body is broken and the world is too loud. I want to stay here with you." She looked at the line between us, and for a second, I thought she was going to disappear, leaving me in the void. The fear of being sent back was worse than the fear of dying had ever been. She reached out, not to grab me, but to show me something. Suddenly, my life didn't flash before my eyes in a linear way. Instead, I felt the impact of my life. I didn't see my career highlights or my bank account. I felt the warmth of a hand I held when I was a younger man helping a neighbor. I felt the ripples of a small act of forgiveness I had granted decades ago. I saw how a single kind word I'd spoken to a stranger in the 1970s had changed the trajectory of their day, and how they had then been kind to someone else. I saw that the truth of our existence isn't about the grand gestures. It's about the microscopic threads of love we weave into the world. "You haven't finished the story," she whispered. "The world still needs the light you carry, even at 81. The tension in that moment was profound. I realized then that my life wasn't a burden I was enduring. It was a mission I hadn't quite completed. I felt a choice, but it was a choice already made by my soul. Suddenly, the golden garden began to distort, like a reflection in a pool of water being hit by a stone. The celestial symphony was replaced by the harsh, rhythmic, and violent thud of chest compressions. I felt the agonizing return of gravity. It felt like being dropped from a skyscraper and landing inside a suit made of lead and ice. The peace was ripped away, replaced by the stinging smell of alcohol and the searing pain of my ribs being pushed to their limit. My eyes snapped open. The glare of the hospital lights was blinding. I felt the cold air hit my lungs, and it felt like breathing in broken glass. I heard a voice, frantic and high-pitched. "We have a pulse. He's back. Mr. Williams, stay with us." I'm 81 now. I've had some time to think about those 4 minutes. I still have the aches in my joints. I still have the wrinkles that map out my life. I still have to struggle to remember where I left my keys. But the one thing I do not have, the thing that lived in the back of my mind like a dark cloud for decades, is the fear. People ask me all the time, when they hear I've crossed over, they ask, "Bill, what's the secret? What's the truth about what's waiting for us?" I tell them the same thing I'm telling you now. I cannot give you a map. I cannot tell you what you will see because I believe the journey is as unique as the soul taking it. I can only tell you what I saw. And what I saw was that we are not human beings waiting for a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings currently immersed in a very brief, very difficult, and very beautiful human experiment. We worry about the end of the book so much that we forget to read the pages we are currently holding. We fear the dark, not realizing that the dark is just the shadow of a much greater light. I learned that every moment of suffering I endured in my 81 years was a teacher, and every moment of love I gave was the only thing that actually traveled with me to the other side. If you are watching this and you are grieving, if you are sitting in a house that feels too quiet because the person you loved is no longer in their chair, please listen to a man who has been to the other side of the curtain and back. Do not waste the days you have left in the paralysis of fear. Love fiercely, even when it hurts. Forgive quickly, even when it feels unfair. Because I promise you, with every fiber of my being, the end is not what you think it is. We are so afraid of the cliff. We spend our lives walking away from the edge, terrified of the fall. But I have been over that edge. I have felt the air beneath my wings, and I can tell you with absolute certainty, death is not a cliff. It is a doorway. And on the other side of that door you will find that you were never, not even for a single second, truly alone. You are loved beyond your wildest imagination, and you are simply waiting for your time to return to the garden. But until then, finish your story. Make it a good one. I've spent 81 years watching the world change, and I've realized that stories are the only things we truly leave behind. This is just one of many chapters I've lived. From the memories of my youth to the silence of that golden garden. If you'd like to hear more stories from a man who has lived over 8 decades and seen the world from both sides, I invite you to consider subscribing and joining me here. I don't know how many stories I have left to tell, but I would like to share them with you while I'm still here to tell them. Tell me in the comments, what is one thing you would do differently today if you knew for certain that you were deeply loved? I read every single one of your words. They are part of my story now too. I'll see you when the sun sets. But for now, I'm going to enjoy this cup of coffee, because now I know exactly how much of a miracle every sip really is. God bless.